climate change issues for some time. One of my fellow organizers told me this story of when she was speaking about climate change in the Bible Belt. This young woman was from the area and was familiar with evangelical Christian culture, so she tried to tailor her speech to them by talking about creation care and being good stewards of the earth. She explained how the carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels are creating a heat-trapping blanket around the earth that's gradually raising its average temperature and threatening life as we know it. She called on her neighbors to take action to care for God's good green earth and to be good stewards of this beautiful place we live. After her talk, an evangelical woman in the audience came up to her and complimented her on her speech. She said, "It's so sweet that you care so much about the earth, but honey, you have to understand God's gonna burn it." "God's gonna burn it" became our slang for trying to talk to people who are blinded by beliefs such that they can't hear new information or knowledge coming from science, or have a discussion about our long-term planning, about the lives of our grandchildren, about what it means for our future. It's this sort of thinking that makes Unitarian Universalists nervous about the word faith. Even the worship associates, who have been pretty game this year about talking about all of our monthly themes, wrestled with this particular theme of the month. Too often we have heard the word faith used as a counterpoint to science. Worse, it's also often used as a justification for hate. As our laws are rapidly changing to support the rights of all people to marry, we can see the last vestiges of hate culture in businesses that hang signs outside their doors or even close their businesses because they refuse to serve gay customers. According to them, this is also about faith. In the liberal religious tradition, we define ourselves against the idea of simply taking things on faith, and we pride ourselves on being a religion of reason. Our tradition is one that understands religion through the lens of modern knowledge, not biblical or other traditional authority. Unlike biblical literists or other fundamentalists, as religious liberals, we do not believe that truth was handed out once for all of time. But what is it that we do believe? If we define ourselves in part by not putting our unquestioning faith in a single piece of scripture written thousands of years ago, in what do we put our faith? How can we as religious liberals work with the concept of faith at all? Religion is about meaning making. Human beings are fundamentally meaning makers. We are storytellers. As Unitarian Universalists, we're fundamentally committed to a free and open search for truth and meaning. We're a religion of seekers, searching together for shared meaning and purpose. And yet, there is a desire among many of us that at some point, something will be found. How do we hold out our hope for a foundness while maintaining our commitment to seeking? How do we include those within our midst who might have already found something? And include those who are still seeking? How do we create an identity that is both about seeking and includes what may or may not be found? How do we stay open to the multiplicity of stories, to the many ways that we all seek and find, and simultaneously find stories that bind us to one another, that we can return to again and again, that provide deep and layered meanings for our lives? While I was in graduate school, the then president of our Unitarian Universalist Star King School for the Ministry, the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker, said that we all have a core operating system. What she meant by this is that we all have some fundamental system of values, some meta-narrative, a story about the world and the way that it works that undergirds our lives. It's a story that tells about what our individual role is, what humanity's role is, what the world is, and how it works. Whether we realize this and articulate it or not, we are all operating on some core assumption of what the world is like. So it is the task of the religious community to raise that story to the surface, to ask you to look inside and determine what it is that you're operating on at a fundamental level, and then bring it up and offer it to you to examine it and see how it reflects your values and affects your lives and how you live them in the world. Religion's assumption is that what we believe matters. Now, this is a little ironic, because in Unitarian Universalism, we don't have a creed. We have those 7 principles that Claire mentioned earlier, but we don't have a set-in-stone, dictated story that everyone has to believe. And this lack of a creed has led many of people, myself included, to say things like, oh, you can believe whatever you want. Or, as a UU, it doesn't matter what you believe. I've probably said these things. Many of us have probably said these things. And it can be just a shorthand, but it also is often a misunderstanding, because what we believe does, in fact, matter. Liberal religion does not assume that it doesn't matter what you believe. Rather, liberal religion recognizes that healthy belief is open to change. Healthy belief expects growth and learning. We expect our religion and belief to be informed by humanity's progress, by new science, by modern knowledge, and by reason. So while it does, in fact, matter what you believe, believing, for instance, that God's gonna burn it, has serious consequences for how we treat this blue boat home. Believing in the science of climate change has caused millions of people to change their behaviors and lobby for changes in laws about burning fossil fuels. Our faith is informed by reason, by modern knowledge, and hence by science. But there's something else, too. It's not just science. In our religious education story this morning, the peasant had a seemingly unreasonable faith that everything would be okay, that life would get better when all the evidence, all of his experiences day after day were to the contrary. In our tradition, as Unitarian Universalists, there's a theological thread that we are moving towards justice. The transcendentalist Unitarian minister Theodore Parker wrote, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but a little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can only divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." This might sound familiar to you. The more famous version of this is probably inspired by Theodore Parker when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." There are a number of foundational theological threads woven together in our Unitarian and Universalist traditions. They make up the tapestry of who we are as a faith. This tapestry envelops us in possibility. It covers the ground of our journey together as seekers. Some people follow this fine thread of the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. the thread that's woven through civil rights struggles, through the dark night of the soul, through grief and despair. This thread is our eschatological hope. It is the story that no matter how hopeless and painful it is now, we will end up together in justice. This story functions to give hope to the hopeless, to light a candle in the dark night of the soul, and to help us move when we are paralyzed by fear, dread, and despair. This thread may or may not include God. For some, it's simply an evolutionary process moving towards increasing complexity, integration, and harmony in which life itself is favored. For others, there is a loving God moving through that process, bringing the world along with God, God's self, with some divine plan for beauty and beloved community. This is not the only thread in our tapestry. We have a number of other core operating systems that are at the heart of our theological tradition. For instance, we also tell an existentialist story. In this story, the world just is. It's not intelligent, it's not moving towards anything in particular, and it is human agency alone that creates and maintains morals, that moves humanity and the community of living earth towards or away from a concept that we have developed called justice. Albert Camus called this the benign indifference of the universe. In this theology, justice is a moral concept that human beings developed. Because human beings alone have ethics, it is our responsibility alone to uphold those ethics. Collective humanity is its own greater power, and the beauty and love that we create together is what holds us. It is our vision of beloved community that we work towards through ethical decisions and the actions that we make in our lives. This story also functions to move us towards justice. It frees people from outside constraints to decide for themselves what their vision of beloved community is. And it empowers them to move towards their own understanding of the good. Another thread in our theological tradition, less prominent but still present, sees the process of life on earth as patterned towards destruction and chaos. In this theological thread, the general movement of history, humanity, and nature is to fall apart. Although our Unitarian theology originated by turning away from this worldview when our founding ministers said, actually, we think humanity is more good than evil, one can still find echoes of our Calvinist forebears in our tradition. There are still liberal religious people and theologians who think humanity trends more towards evil than good. One can see even more evidence for this worldview in broader society. It undergirds conservative politics. The world is prone to disintegration, full of bad guys and spinning ever faster towards chaos. So we must be ever vigilant against that evil encroaching up upon us, from our borders to our schools to our families. This theology functions to increase fear and boundaries, to bring us to suspicion and bring our attention towards defense. So when we talk about faith, we must attend both to belief and to how that belief functions in the world. How does what we believe cause us to act? What does it provide for those of us who believe it? Last year, when I was the intern minister at Unity Church Unitarian in St. Paul, a group of us participated in cross-cultural beloved conversations with 2 other churches. Unity is a large Unitarian Universalist church with high and formal liturgy and a majority middle and upper class white congregation. The other 2 churches were primarily African American. One was a non-traditional Pentecostal Universalist congregation, and the other one was a traditional Baptist congregation. In these conversations, one of the Unitarian participants explained that through developing relationships of trust with the folks in these congregations, she saw their faith functioning in a way that she had not previously considered. As a lifelong atheist, she had spent most of her life dismissing and even deriding saving faiths for what she understood to be superstitious belief in something unreasonable. But when she developed friendships with people who believed in a life-affirming version of that faith, she saw how their belief in something larger than themselves that saved people from poverty, from oppression, from grief and despair, functioned in their lives to restore hope and beauty and love. She saw how it caused her friends to act in loving and accepting ways that held out hope for the future, and an accepting love for her, an open atheist, as another child of their God. Now, these friendships didn't change her own beliefs, but seeing how it functioned in her friends' lives gave her a newfound understanding of its value, both to them and to a loving and accepting world. As religious liberals, we send our belief through the fire of doubt and reason. We need to know that our truth has been tested by the strength of our minds as well as our hearts. I submit to you that you do in fact believe in something. You have a story of how the world works. What I'm asking is, what are the consequences of your story? How does it make you behave in the world? How can you learn to discern not only the merits of historical truth in various stories, but also the merits of those stories, even those myths, effects? For instance, the woman who told my organizer friend that God's gonna burn it, and the folks we worked with in Beloved Conversations in St. Paul would all say they subscribe to the Christian story. But they interpret the same sets of stories in very different ways, and with very different consequences for how they behave in the world. The peasant in our children's story had a faith that kept him sustained through suffering, that gave him hope against despair despite his circumstances. How can we recognize the complexity of how human beings live out their faith in the world? Our reason calls us to greater discernment in knowing our own core operating system and in witnessing the effects of a variety of different core operating systems. As UUs, we're called to both examine our own beliefs and to evaluate the merits and consequences of beliefs around us. So it's not okay to just believe whatever you want, because beliefs matter. They have consequences. And we have to look at what those consequences are for both ourselves and for others. Now, Unitarian Universalism is still a big tent of belief. We welcome all people from a variety of beliefs and traditions, but we discern how those beliefs cause us to act in the world. Are you an atheist whose understanding of the world is that we are called to create human justice on the basis of human-developed ethics? Or an atheist who sees an indifferent world as a call to nihilism? Are you a Christian whose core operating system teaches that some are saved and others are damned, which causes you to act out of exclusion and hate? Or are you a Christian whose core operating system teaches that God is love and acts out your belief in the world by loving your neighbor? Beliefs do matter. Our Unitarian Universalist reason and faith calls us to examine them and how they affect us in the world. But the point is that we believe in something. We believe in something larger than ourselves. Call it collective humanity, Jesus Christ, the moving and living universe, Inanna, the elements, Adonai, Allah, Mother Mary. The point is that there is a larger love, holding us and calling us to the work of peace and justice, holding us together and calling us to the work of peace and justice. May it be so, and amen.